Marcus Chen had never considered himself lucky. As a single father working 2 jobs to support his 7-year-old daughter Emma, luck seemed like a luxury reserved for other people. So when the lawyer's letter arrived informing him that his late uncle, a reclusive eccentric he'd met only twice, had left him a property in the Nevada desert, Marcus assumed it was either a mistake or a burden he couldn't afford to maintain. The warehouse sat 40 miles outside of Reno, accessible only by a deteriorating dirt road that snaked through scrubland and rocky outcrops. When Marcus and Emma finally arrived on a blistering Saturday morning, the structure looked exactly as unpromising as he'd imagined, a massive corrugated metal building, its walls streaked with rust, its windows either broken or painted black from the inside. Tumbleweeds had collected against one wall, and the padlock on the main door had corroded so badly that Marcus wondered if it would even open. "This is it?" Emma asked, her disappointment evident. She'd been excited about the prospect of inheriting a mystery building, imagining everything from a chocolate factory to a secret arcade. The reality was decidedly less magical. "I'm afraid so, sweetheart," Marcus said, wrestling with the lock. It finally gave way with a shriek of protesting metal, and the door swung open to reveal an interior that was somehow even more depressing than the exterior. The warehouse was mostly empty, containing only a few scattered wooden crates, some ancient-looking office furniture, and a thick layer of dust that made both of them cough. Shafts of light pierced through holes in the roof, illuminating dancing motes in the stale air. Marcus spent the next hour exploring the space while Emma drew pictures in the dust with a stick. He was mentally calculating demolition costs when he noticed something odd. The warehouse had no visible foundation vents, yet according to the property documents, the building had a full basement. In the desert heat, that would make the lower level an oven, unless it was much deeper than a typical basement. He found the basement access in the northwest corner, hidden behind a stack of rotting pallets. It wasn't a traditional staircase, but rather a heavy steel hatch set into the concrete floor, secured with a wheel lock mechanism that looked more appropriate for a submarine than a warehouse. The mechanism was well-oiled, which struck Marcus as strange given the abandonment above. When he turned the wheel, it moved smoothly, and the hatch lifted on pneumatic pistons that hissed like something living. "Emma, stay back!" he called, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. The beam revealed a metal staircase descending into darkness, not the few feet of a typical basement, but what looked like several stories down. The stairs were pristine, free of the rust and decay that characterized everything above ground. The walls were smooth concrete, and as Marcus descended the first few steps, he noticed they were marked with depth indicators. 20 feet, 40 feet, 60 feet. "Dad, what's down there?" Emma's voice echoed from above, tinged with the particular mix of fear and fascination that only children can perfectly capture. "I'm not sure yet. Stay by the door where I can see you." Marcus continued down, his phone light barely penetrating the gloom. At 80 feet, the staircase ended at another door, this one more modern, made of what looked like reinforced steel, with a keypad beside it. The keypad was illuminated with a soft green light, indicating it still had power. That was impossible. The warehouse above had been disconnected from the electrical grid for at least a decade, according to the utility records. Marcus tried the handle more out of curiosity than expectation, but to his surprise, it turned. The door wasn't locked. It opened silently on well-maintained hinges, and motion sensors triggered a cascade of lights that stretched away into what Marcus could now see was an enormous underground facility. He stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The space before him was vast, easily as large as the warehouse above, possibly larger, and it was filled with equipment. Not the rusty junk of the surface level, but sophisticated, well-maintained machinery that hummed with quiet purpose. Computer servers lined one wall, their indicator lights blinking in complex patterns. What looked like a clean room occupied one corner, its airlock door marked with biohazard symbols, and dominating the center of the space was something that made Marcus's breath catch. A massive cylindrical object, at least 30 feet long and 10 feet in diameter, suspended in a cradle of support struts and surrounded by scaffolding. It took him a moment to recognize what he was looking at, and when he did, his first thought was that he must be mistaken. It looked exactly like the Apollo-era lunar modules he'd seen in museums, but that was impossible. Those were all accounted for, safely displayed in institutions across the country. This couldn't be real. But as he approached, drawn forward despite every instinct telling him to leave and call someone, anyone, he could see the details that spoke to authenticity. The rivets were hand-placed, not machine-pressed. The metal showed the particular pattern of heat damage consistent with atmospheric re-entry, and on one panel, partially obscured by a protective tarp, he could make out stenciled letters, NASA, and below that, a designation number he didn't recognize. Marcus pulled out his phone to take a picture, and that's when he noticed he had no signal. Not just low bars, the phone couldn't find any network at all, as if the underground facility was shielded. He was about to climb back up to call the authorities when he heard Emma's scream. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart pounding, Emma's name tearing from his throat. He found her standing exactly where he'd left her, unharmed, but pointing at something near the ceiling. Following her gaze, Marcus saw what had frightened her. A security camera, its red light blinking very much active, and beside it a speaker crackled to life. "Mr. Chen," a woman's voice said, calm and measured, "please don't be alarmed. You and your daughter are perfectly safe. However, I need you to close the hatch and step away from the basement entrance. We need to talk about what you found, and I'm afraid that conversation needs to happen very carefully. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I'm with NASA's Historical Materials Recovery Program, and I've been monitoring this facility for the past 15 years, waiting for someone with proper authorization to arrive. Your uncle was one of 3 people who knew what's down there. Now you're the 4th. And what you do in the next few hours could either rewrite history or start a crisis that reaches all the way to the White House." Marcus looked at Emma, then at the open hatch, then back at the camera. His mind was reeling with questions, but one thought emerged clearly. His uncle hadn't left him an abandoned warehouse. He'd left him a secret that had been buried in the desert for decades, a secret important enough that someone at NASA had been watching over it for 15 years. And whatever that secret was, it was connected to the impossible piece of space program history he'd just found 80 feet underground. He had a terrible feeling that his life and Emma's would never be simple again. Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived 3 hours later in an unmarked SUV, accompanied by 2 men in dark suits who Marcus suspected were more than the legal representatives she'd introduced them as. She was in her late 50s, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had the particular intensity of someone who'd spent a career keeping explosive secrets. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Chen, before we proceed, I need you to understand the gravity of what you've discovered," she said, setting a slim briefcase on the hood of Marcus's car. Emma was playing nearby, intentionally kept at a distance but within sight. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Technically, I shouldn't be telling you at all, but your uncle was insistent that if anything happened to him, his heir should know the truth. He made legal arrangements to ensure that." "What is that thing down there?" Marcus asked. "It looks like—" "Apollo 19, Dr. Mitchell interrupted. "And yes, before you say it, I'm aware that the Apollo program officially ended with Apollo 17. That's what the public knows. That's what most of NASA knows. But there were 2 additional missions, both classified, both launched in secret in 1976. Apollo 18 completed successfully, and no one outside a very small circle ever knew it happened. Apollo 19 was supposed to be equally uneventful. It wasn't." She opened the briefcase and withdrew a tablet, calling up documents that bore the unmistakable markings of declassified materials, except these redactions were so heavy that entire pages were nothing but black bars. Your uncle, James Chen, was a propulsion engineer who worked on the Apollo program, but his real specialty was in materials recovery and analysis. After Apollo 19, he was brought into a special project to study something the crew had brought back. Brought back from where? Marcus felt like he was in a movie, except the fear coiling in his stomach was very real. From the far side of the moon, Dr. Mitchell said. The mission was supposed to be geological in nature, core samples, rock analysis, that sort of thing. But what they found wasn't geological. It was technological. The word hung in the air between them like a grenade, with the pin pulled. Marcus heard it, understood it, and felt his world-view tilt sickeningly. You're saying, I'm not saying anything that could be construed as confirmation of extraterrestrial contact, Dr. Mitchell said carefully, because that's not what the official record shows. What the official record shows is that Apollo 19 discovered an unusual metallic structure embedded in a crater on the far side of the moon. The structure showed evidence of manufacturing processes not consistent with natural formation. The crew retrieved several components which were brought back to Earth for analysis, and my uncle analyzed them. Your uncle was part of the team that tried to understand what they'd found, and here's where things get complicated. Dr. Mitchell swiped through more documents on her tablet. The components were like nothing we'd ever seen. Some of them were clearly mechanical, gears, housings, what looked like circuitry but made from materials we couldn't identify. Others were more ambiguous. But the most significant object was something the crew referred to in their classified logs as the seed. She pulled up a photograph that made Marcus's blood run cold. It showed what looked like a small metallic sphere, perhaps 6 inches in diameter, suspended in a containment field inside what was clearly a high-security laboratory. The sphere's surface seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, impossible patterns playing across its surface. This object, Dr. Mitchell continued, exhibited properties that our scientists couldn't explain. It seemed to respond to human presence, becoming more active when researchers were nearby. It emitted radiation, but not any form we recognized. And in 3 documented instances, it appeared to communicate. Communicate, Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Brief sequences of electromagnetic pulses that, when analyzed, showed patterns consistent with mathematical progressions. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, the kind of thing that can't be natural, that implies intelligence. Dr. Mitchell closed the tablet. The project became classified beyond top secret. Only a handful of people knew about it, and they were sworn to secrecy for life. Your uncle was one of them. Why did he keep the command module? Marcus asked, trying to process information that felt like it belonged in a science fiction novel. If this was all so secret... He didn't keep it, Dr. Mitchell said. It was never officially recovered. According to NASA's records, Apollo 19 burned up on re-entry over the Pacific in 1976 due to a catastrophic failure. That was the cover story. In reality, the module landed exactly where it was supposed to, in the desert near here. But instead of recovering it through official channels, a decision was made at the highest levels to keep it dark. Completely dark. So dark that it didn't exist on any inventory, any photograph, any official documentation. Why? Because by then, the project studying the artifacts had run into problems. Serious problems. Dr. Mitchell's expression grew troubled. The sphere had begun to change. It started emitting more complex signals. Researchers who spent extended time near it began experiencing strange symptoms, vivid dreams, all with similar themes of vast spaces and ancient civilizations. One scientist claimed she could hear it speaking to her, though no sound was ever recorded. The decision was made to shut down the active research and seal everything away until we better understood what we were dealing with. But my uncle kept the module, Marcus said, and you've been watching it. Why? Because 3 years after the project was sealed, something happened. Dr. Mitchell glanced toward Emma, making sure she was still out of earshot. The primary storage facility where the artifacts were kept was completely destroyed. An explosion, officially ruled as an industrial accident. Every artifact recovered from that lunar site was supposedly destroyed, including the sphere. But your uncle told his supervisors something that made them reconsider. What did he tell them? That he'd made copies. Not physical copies, that was impossible with our technology, but detailed scans, molecular analyses, complete documentation of everything they'd studied, and he'd hidden that data somewhere no one would think to look, in the command module's on-board computers. Those systems were supposed to be fried during re-entry, but your uncle had been clever. He'd shielded the memory cores, preserved every bit of data from the mission, including years of research on the artifacts. Marcus looked back at the warehouse, understanding beginning to dawn. This entire place is a data vault. The module is the archive, Dr. Mitchell confirmed. Everything we learned about those artifacts, every test, every analysis, every theory about what they might be and where they came from, it's all stored in those computers. Your uncle designed systems to keep them powered and preserved, and when he retired, he set up monitoring systems and waited. He knew that eventually someone would need that data again. Why would anyone need it? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Dr. Mitchell's expression became grave. Because 3 weeks ago we detected a signal, not from space, from Earth. Specifically from the general region of Mare Orientale, on the near side of the Moon, visible from Earth with a good telescope. The signal matches the patterns we documented from the sphere before the facility was destroyed. Something up there has activated, Mr. Chen. Something that's been dormant for potentially millions of years. And the only information we have about what we might be dealing with is locked in the computers 80 feet below your inherited warehouse. Marcus felt the world contracting around him. That's why you were waiting. You knew something like this might happen. Your uncle knew, Dr. Mitchell said. He spent his final years studying the patterns in the data, the mathematical progressions in the signals. He believed he'd found something, evidence of a countdown embedded in the transmissions. A countdown to what, he wasn't certain, but he calculated that whatever was going to happen would happen sometime in the next few months. He tried to warn his former colleagues, but most of them had died or were too old to be taken seriously. So he put his contingency plan in place. He left this facility to someone he trusted would do the right thing when the time came. He barely knew me, Marcus protested. We met twice. He knew you better than you think. He'd been watching your life from a distance, in a non-creepy way, she added hastily, seeing Marcus's expression. He knew you were a good father, that you'd raised a bright, curious daughter on your own. He knew you asked questions and didn't accept easy answers, and most importantly, he knew you weren't connected to the military-industrial complex or the intelligence community. You're clean, Mr. Chen. You're exactly the kind of person who can be trusted with something like this. Marcus looked at Emma, who was examining a beetle she'd found on the ground, completely oblivious to the fact that her father's entire reality had just been inverted. What do you want from me? Help, Dr. Mitchell said simply. I need access to that data, but I can't just requisition it through official channels without triggering questions we're not prepared to answer. The program doesn't officially exist. The facility doesn't officially exist, but you own it, legally, legitimately. You can grant access without raising red flags. We can bring in a team, extract the data, and begin trying to understand what's happening on the Moon before it becomes a crisis. And if I say no? Dr. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Then I'll respect your decision and leave, but that signal from the Moon is getting stronger, and it's starting to attract attention. Amateur astronomers have noticed unusual light patterns in Mare Orientale. Chinese and Russian satellites have been repositioning to get better views of the area. It's only a matter of time before someone gets curious enough to take a closer look, and when they do, they're going to find whatever your uncle's team found in 1976, except this time the whole world will be watching. She leaned forward, her intensity unmistakable. Your uncle spent the last 40 years of his life keeping this secret because he believed humanity wasn't ready for it. Maybe he was right, but ready or not, I think the secret is about to reveal itself. And the only advantage we have is the data in that command module, the knowledge that might help us understand what we're dealing with before it's too late. Marcus looked at the warehouse, at Dr. Mitchell, and finally at his daughter, who had abandoned the beetle and was now drawing in the dirt with a stick, creating elaborate patterns that reminded him eerily of the photographs he'd just seen of the artifact's surface markings. He thought about the life he'd built for them, simple and safe and predictable. He thought about the life his uncle must have lived, carrying the weight of cosmic secrets. And he thought about the fact that sometimes ordinary people were thrust into extraordinary situations, not because they asked for it, but because someone had to stand in the gap when history came calling. "On one condition," he said finally. "Whatever happens, whatever you find, Emma and I get to know the truth. Real truth, not sanitized versions or need-to-know bullshit. If my uncle thought this was important enough to plan for, then we deserve to understand why." Dr. Mitchell extended her hand. "You have my word. Welcome to the most important secret in human history, Mr. Chen. I hope you're ready for what comes next." As they shook hands, Marcus caught a glimpse of his daughter's drawing in the dirt. She'd created a spiral pattern, intricate and mathematical, that looked nothing like anything a 7-year-old should conceivably create. When he called her over to ask about it, she simply shrugged. "I don't know, Daddy. I just felt like it should look that way." Dr. Mitchell had noticed too, and the expression on her face told Marcus everything he needed to know about how much deeper this rabbit hole was about to go. The team arrived in the dead of night, 3 unmarked vehicles carrying equipment and personnel that Marcus suspected had been on standby for weeks. Dr. Mitchell had moved quickly once he'd given permission, transforming the dusty warehouse into a legitimate research facility within hours. Generators were brought in, power lines were run down into the underground chamber, and what looked like a mobile laboratory was set up in the corner of the warehouse floor. Emma was staying with Marcus's sister in Reno, a decision that had nearly broken his heart, but that Dr. Mitchell had insisted upon. "Once we start accessing those systems," she'd explained, "we don't know what might happen. The signals, the dreams that affected the original researchers, we can't risk exposing your daughter to that until we understand it better." The memory of Emma's inexplicable spiral drawing had made that argument persuasive. Now Marcus stood in the underground chamber, watching a team of technicians carefully remove access panels from the Apollo command module. The capsule looked simultaneously ancient and impossibly well preserved, a relic from an era when America had been brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to shoot people into space on glorified firecrackers. Dr. Mitchell stood beside him, monitoring readouts on a tablet, while a young man with a NASA badge Marcus didn't recognize worked to interface modern equipment with technology that was half a century old. "The tricky part," Dr. Mitchell explained, "is that your uncle didn't just store the data in the original computers. He created a distributed network, spreading the information across multiple systems, including backup drives that he custom fabricated and installed in hidden compartments throughout the module. It was his insurance policy. If anyone found the capsule and tried to wipe the computers, they'd only get part of the picture." "Paranoid," Marcus observed. "Careful. Dr. Mitchell corrected. There were people who wanted this information buried forever. Your uncle had to assume that even his colleagues might be compromised. So he created a system that only someone with complete access to the physical module could crack. Someone who owned it, who could take their time studying it without official oversight. Someone like me. Exactly like you. The technician straightened up, removing his headlamp. We're ready, Dr. Mitchell. The core systems are responding, and I've located 7 of the 8 hidden storage units. Running diagnostics now to make sure nothing's corrupted. 8? Marcus asked. You said 7 of 8? There's one unit we haven't found yet, Dr. Mitchell admitted. According to your uncle's notes, which we only got access to through his lawyer after his death, he installed a final storage device somewhere in the module, one that contains what he called the key findings. His notes suggest it's protected by a mechanical lock that requires a specific sequence to access. A combination? More like a puzzle. Your uncle was fond of those. She showed Marcus a page from James Chen's notebook, filled with complex mathematical notations and what looked like star charts. He left clues, but they're not straightforward. We've been trying to decode them for 3 weeks, ever since we were given access to his personal effects. Marcus studied the page, recognizing some of the mathematical symbols from his own engineering background, but losing the thread when the equations became more esoteric. However, one thing did catch his attention: a series of numbers that his uncle had circled repeatedly. These look familiar. They should, Dr. Mitchell said. They're coordinates, lunar coordinates specifically, marking the location where the artifacts were found. No, Marcus said slowly, memory clicking into place. I mean, yes, but that's not why they're familiar. Emma's birthday, July 16th, 71676, and my birthday, April 12th, 411242. He knew these dates. He sent cards every year, never forgot. Dr. Mitchell's eyes widened. That's it. That's exactly the kind of thing he'd do. Hide the key in something personal, something only family would recognize. She called over one of the technicians. Check the module for any locking mechanism that accepts a 6-digit input. Try 71676 first, then 41242. It took 15 minutes of careful searching, but they found it. A small panel near the base of the capsule, almost invisible among the heat-shielding tiles. Behind it was a mechanism that looked like a cross between a combination lock and a puzzle box with 6 numbered dials. The technician carefully set them to 7 to 1, 6, 7 to 6, and turned a recessed lever. Nothing happened. Try the other sequence, Dr. Mitchell said, tension evident in her voice. 4-1 to 2-4-2. Another turn of the lever. This time, something clicked deep within the module structure, and a small drawer slid out from what had appeared to be solid hull material. Inside was a storage device unlike anything Marcus had seen, a crystalline structure no bigger than a deck of cards, shot through with metallic threads in patterns that looked organic rather than manufactured. Good God, breathed Dr. Mitchell. He didn't just store the data. He rebuilt part of it using the same principles as the artifacts themselves. Is that safe? Marcus asked, taking an involuntary step back. Probably not, Dr. Mitchell admitted, but it's brilliant. Standard storage degrades over time, but this, if he successfully replicated the artifact's material properties, this could remain stable for centuries. She looked at the technician. Can you interface with it? I can try, but we'll need to be extremely careful. If this thing is anything like the original artifacts, it might react to our attempts to access it. They spent the next 3 hours setting up containment protocols and analysis equipment around the crystalline storage device. Marcus watched, feeling increasingly out of his depth, as people with advanced degrees discussed quantum states and exotic matter behaviors that sounded more like magic than science. But Dr. Mitchell had kept her word. No one asked him to leave, and she patiently explained what was happening whenever he looked confused. Finally, as midnight approached, they were ready to attempt the first data extraction. The crystalline device sat inside a Faraday cage, connected by fiber optic cables to a heavily shielded computer system. Dr. Mitchell stood at the controls, her hand hovering over the activation switch. "Once we do this," she said, addressing the room, "we can't undo it. Whatever's in here, whatever your uncle thought was so important that he built this elaborate safe to protect it, we're about to release it. I want everyone to remember that the original research program was shut down because people were experiencing cognitive effects from exposure to the artifacts. We have medical personnel standing by, and if anyone starts feeling unusual, dreams, hallucinations, anything, you report it immediately. Understood?" A chorus of acknowledgements answered her. Marcus noticed that several team members were wearing what looked like modified EEG headsets, presumably to monitor for any neurological anomalies. Dr. Mitchell threw the switch. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the crystalline device began to glow, a soft blue luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with something Marcus couldn't quite identify. The light seemed to have depth to it, as if he were seeing into multiple dimensions simultaneously. Data began scrolling across the computer screens, not in English or any recognizable programming language, but in symbols that Marcus's eyes tried to interpret as letters, numbers, and something else that hurt to look at directly. "We're getting massive data transfer," one technician reported, her voice tight. "But the encoding is unlike anything I've seen. The computer's trying to translate, but... Wait, there's a secondary layer. Oh God, it's not just data. There's something else embedded in the transmission." "What kind of something?" Dr. Mitchell demanded. Before the technician could answer, every screen in the underground facility went black. Then, simultaneously, they all displayed the same thing: a rotating three-dimensional model of the moon, with a point on the far side pulsing red. As they watched, a second point appeared on the near side, Mer Orientale, where the recent signals had originated. A line connected the 2 points, and text appeared beneath them in plain English. "Beacon activated. Return signal detected. Origin system responding. Estimated time to arrival, 127 days. The chamber erupted in chaos. People were shouting, trying to regain control of their systems, demanding to know what arrival meant. But Marcus couldn't look away from the screens, because beneath the main message, another line of text had appeared, updating in real time. First contact protocol engaged. Human cognition adaptation sequence initiated. Subjects within range. 8. "Everyone out!" Dr. Mitchell yelled. "Now! Emergency protocols!" But it was too late. Marcus felt something shift in his mind, like a door opening that he hadn't known was there. Suddenly, he wasn't just seeing the underground chamber. He was seeing it from multiple perspectives simultaneously, including viewpoints that couldn't possibly be his. He could feel the presence of the other 7 people in the room, their fear and confusion and wonder, as if their emotions were radio signals he'd just learned to receive. And beneath it all, he felt something vast and ancient turning its attention toward Earth. Not hostile, not friendly, just aware, observing, waiting for something that had been set in motion 50 years ago when a classified mission had found something on the moon that humanity hadn't been ready to discover. The message on the screens changed one final time. "The architects are coming. They wish to see what you've built with the seed they left behind." As consciousness began to fade, not into darkness, but into a space filled with impossible colors and geometries that his brain struggled to process, Marcus's last coherent thought was of Emma, his daughter, who had drawn patterns she shouldn't know, who might have been exposed to whatever this was when she'd stood too close to the open hatch. Whatever his uncle had protected all these years, whatever secret he'd hidden in the desert and encoded in crystals and locked behind family birthdays, It wasn't just historical data, it was a trigger, a key designed to turn in a lock that had been waiting for millions of years. And now that the key had turned, nothing would ever be the same again. When Marcus woke 6 hours later, Dr. Mitchell was sitting beside his cot in what appeared to be a medical bay. The other team members were visible in adjacent areas, all being monitored by concerned-looking medical staff. "Welcome back," Dr. Mitchell said. She looked exhausted, but there was also something new in her expression, something that looked like wonder mixed with terror. "Before you ask, everyone's okay. Unconscious for a few hours, but okay. Your daughter's fine too. I had her checked out as a precaution, but she shows no signs of exposure effects." "What happened?" Marcus's voice was rough. "We accessed something that was never meant to be understood through technology alone," Dr. Mitchell said. "Your uncle's final storage device wasn't just a data archive. It was a communication system designed to interface directly with human consciousness. The seed that the Apollo 19 crew found wasn't just an artifact. It was a message compressed into physical form, waiting for a species to evolve to the point where they could understand it. The architects," Marcus said, "memories from his altered state of consciousness filtering back into awareness. That's what they called themselves, the ones who left the seed." "What else do you remember?" Marcus closed his eyes, trying to organize thoughts that felt too big for his skull. "They're old, incredibly old. They've been seeding the galaxy with these devices for, I don't even have words for how long. Millions of years. Billions. And each seed is programmed to activate when the local species reaches a certain threshold of development." "The threshold being what? Space travel?" "Not just travel. Understanding, the ability to look at something completely unknown and approach it with curiosity rather than fear. To preserve it, study it, try to learn from it." Marcus opened his eyes. "That's why the Apollo 19 crew was chosen. That's why my uncle was part of the analysis team. They were testing us, seeing if we could handle the knowledge without destroying ourselves or the artifacts. And we passed, barely, by choosing to hide what we'd found rather than weaponize it or use it to claim superiority over other nations. And now they're coming," Dr. Mitchell said softly. "In 127 days, something from outside our solar system will arrive at Earth. Your uncle knew this. The countdown he discovered in the signals wasn't a countdown to disaster. It was an arrival time. He spent years trying to prepare humanity for first contact, knowing that when it came, it would change everything. That's why he set up the contingency, why he left the module to me." Understanding was crystallizing for Marcus, pieces of his uncle's plan becoming clear. He needed someone outside the system to trigger the final message, someone who couldn't be intimidated or silenced by governments or agencies, someone who would act out of curiosity and concern rather than political calculation. "And someone with a daughter," Dr. Mitchell added gently. "Marcus, when the adaptation sequence activated, it prioritized 8 people in proximity to the device. 7 of us were researchers, chosen by circumstance. But Emma, she'd been exposed earlier when you first discovered the chamber. The seed detected her presence and began preparing her." "Preparing her for what?" "To be part of what comes next. The architects don't just observe developed species, they offer them a choice. To join a galactic community that's older than our sun, or to remain isolated, developing at their own pace. But the choice requires representatives who can understand both human limitations and cosmic possibilities. Your uncle calculated that Emma's generation would be the ones to make that choice. He was preparing her the only way he could, by ensuring she'd be exposed to the seed's influence early enough that it would shape her development naturally." Marcus felt anger flash through him. "He experimented on my daughter without consent." "He gave her a gift," Dr. Mitchell countered, "the ability to be the bridge between what humanity is and what it might become. Not everyone who's been exposed to the artifacts experiences the effects the same way. Your uncle believed it required a certain cognitive flexibility, an openness to possibilities that most adults have lost, but children still possess. Emma has that gift. And in 127 days, when the architects arrive, we're going to need people like her to help us understand what they're offering. Marcus wanted to argue, to rage against the manipulation and the secrets. But another part of him, the part that had briefly touched something vast and ancient and full of wonder, understood. His uncle hadn't been experimenting. He'd been hoping that his brother's child, the niece he barely knew but had watched from afar, might be one of the ones capable of taking humanity into a larger, stranger, more magnificent future. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Dr. Mitchell smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, it was a genuine expression of joy rather than professional courtesy. "Now we tell the world the truth. Not all of it, not yet, but enough that when the architects arrive, people are expecting something. Your uncle left detailed instructions for this phase too, gradually escalating disclosures, carefully worded announcements, strategic leaks that build awareness without causing panic." "And Emma?" "Emma gets to be a kid for 127 more days. After that," Dr. Mitchell shrugged, "after that, she gets to help decide what humanity becomes next, along with her father, if he's willing to continue the work your uncle started." Marcus spent his days at the warehouse facility, now openly acknowledged as a critical research site, helping to decode the final layers of his uncle's archives. Emma attended school, but was also part of a growing group of touched individuals who met regularly to share their experiences and prepare for the role they'd play in first contact. Dr. Mitchell had been right about the spreading influence. Artists were creating works that depicted alien worlds they'd never seen. Musicians were composing pieces that incorporated harmonic structures from other species' musical traditions. Scientists were making intuitive leaps that their training couldn't account for, solving problems that had stumped experts for decades. It was, Marcus realized, exactly what his uncle had hoped for, a gentle awakening of humanity's potential, a preparation for the cosmic stage that didn't rely on any one government or institution, but instead emerged organically from the collective human experience. On the day the architect's vessel entered lunar orbit, Marcus and Emma were back at the warehouse, watching on screens as cameras around the world captured the impossible sight of a structure larger than a city hanging in space, catching sunlight and reflecting it in patterns that made people weep without understanding why. "Dad," Emma said, holding his hand tightly, "I can feel them now. Not in dreams, for real. They're looking at us, at all of us, and they're so curious. They want to know everything about us, our art, our music, our hopes and fears and dreams. They've been waiting so long to meet us." Marcus pulled her close, watching as the vessel's surface began to shimmer and shift, patterns of light dancing across its hull in what every touched individual on Earth simultaneously understood as a greeting, a celebration, a welcome. His uncle had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, carrying the weight of knowledge that would have crushed most people, working in secret to give humanity the best possible chance at surviving, thriving, when first contact finally came. Looking at his daughter, seeing the wonder in her eyes, and feeling the echoes of cosmic greeting reverberating through his own mind, Marcus understood that his uncle's gift hadn't been the warehouse, or the hidden data, or even the advance warning. His gift had been hope. Hope that humanity could be more than its worst instincts, could reach beyond its petty divisions, could look at something incomprehensibly vast and alien and respond not with fear, but with the one thing that had always defined the species at its best: the desire to understand, the desire to connect, the desire to reach out across the darkness and say, "Hello, we're here. We've been waiting for you too." And now, after 50 years of secrets and silence, after generations of wondering if we were alone in the universe, The answer had finally arrived in the skies above Earth. We were not alone. We had never been alone. And the architects, patient and ancient and infinitely curious, were ready to show humanity just how magnificent the cosmos could be, if we were brave enough to take their hand and step into the light.